Out as we reveal new concerns about the quality of the steel the French energy giant EDF had planned to use. And despite torrential rain and flooding, there are predictions of record turnout in the EU referendum. Old and young have until 10 tonight to cast their historic vote.
Does it feel like a historic day for you?
Absolutely. I think, this will be remembered for generations to come.
It's my future and then my nephew and my kids' future, so got to think of them.
And it's the joke that's doing the rounds on social media. If Donald Trump succeeds President Obama, then orange is the new black. But in reality, it's one of Netflix's most successful shows. Set in a women's prison, Orange is the New Black is political and personal. Tonight, we talk with two of its stars about how far the Donald has come.
I'm personally mortified, and I will say that to you. I'm sure
we are all mortified.
Absolutely astounded that it's come to this.
Chanting, "We shall overcome," and shame, there were chaotic scenes in the US House of Representatives as Democrats staged an overnight 25-hour-long sit-in to demand a vote on gun control laws. Veteran civil rights leader John Lewis led the protest just 11 days after the deadliest mass shooting in recent American history. The protesters filed outside a short time ago. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is there. Kylie.
Well, yes, some very weary Congress people have just been filing out of the chamber here. These were really extraordinary scenes. When I was in there, I could see congresswomen clutching pillows, blankets. They were filming themselves on phones. Of course, all of this was going out on social media because the official broadcast of Congress had been switched off by the Republicans. Really amazing scenes, fueled, of course, by what happened in Orlando, the worst mass shooting in America's recent history. 49 people killed there. Most of the Congress people who were participating in what happened yesterday were wearing those kind of rainbow flags on their lapels in tribute toward those who lost their lives. But it seems that everyone here is quite surprised by how successful this has been. They're saying that even though they didn't win any concessions from the Republicans, that they will be back next week to continue this fight, to try and get some legislation on the table. They're pushing for two simple things, really quite small steps. One is to make sure that people who are on a no-fly list cannot go out and buy a weapon, and the other is to try and expand criminal background checks. But those two small steps are what led to the extraordinary scenes that began here about 25 hours ago.
We will no longer be denied a right to vote.
Last night, the Congress that's known for doing nothing decided to do something. Finally, it found its voice in a hero of the civil rights movement wearing a rainbow ribbon to remember those killed in Orlando.
We must remove the blinders. The time for silence and patience is long gone.
John Lewis stood among his fellow Democratic representatives pleading for a vote on two simple gun control measures.
How many more mothers, how many more fathers need to shed tears of grief?
We're marching today to dramatize to the nation.
Congressman John Lewis brought the weight of history to the congressional sit-in. After all, he marched at Selma alongside Martin Luther King. When Congress began to sing, it was a civil rights anthem they chose. Nicole Hockley, whose son Dylan was murdered at Sandy Hook, was listening.
I started crying, especially when they reached the verse and they said, "We shall protect our children." And then to have Speaker Ryan, just come in around that 10 o'clock mark and try to force votes over them was just so disrespectful, so disrespectful.
House to be in order. The chair wishes to make an announcement.
When the Republicans' senior-most congressman entered the House, things got rowdy.
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk two privilege reports from the Committee on Rules.
Resolution providing for consideration of the bill.
The Conservative majority rushed through business despite Democrats' protests and then declared a holiday recess 2 days early. They even switched off C-SPAN, the official chamber broadcast, but that backfired when Democrats started to live stream proceedings themselves.
Help us win this battle, America. Call your representative up.
And C-SPAN chose to show that instead.
Silence in the face of injustice makes this House complicit.
After every one of these massacres, we've had these moments of silence, and people have just said enough is enough. That may make people feel good, but it doesn't do anything to stop the next massacre or to reduce gun violence.
There were pillows and blankets for congressional comfort. Senator Elizabeth Warren even brought donuts. But there was no sweetening the mood of the Republican leadership.
We know that there is an issue with respect to terrorist watch lists and people attempt to buy guns. We're looking at that. We're doing it deliberatively. We're not doing publicity stunts on the floor. We're actually looking at this issue so that we get it right. Because, by the way, remember what the FBI told us. You get this wrong, you're going to screw up terrorist investigations.
It's nearly 2 weeks since America's worst mass shooting that took 49 lives in Orlando. But other massacres, including Sandy Hook, have failed to achieve any meaningful change in gun laws. As we discovered, assault weapons can be bought in less time than it takes to shop for groceries. Still, Democrats insist their sit-in, just ended, can be a new beginning.
Kylie Morris in Washington, and we'll be speaking to a member of the gun lobby and one of the congressmen who took part in the sit-in later in this programme.
Well, in Germany, police have shot dead a masked gunman after he took hostages inside a cinema complex. Local officials said the man, who appeared to be disturbed, had been armed with a rifle. As reports of a hostage situation came in, heavily armed elite police were deployed to the town of Viernheim near Frankfurt, storming the Kinopolis complex at about 3 o'clock local time this afternoon. Inigo Gilmore reports.
Heavily armed special police commandos rushed to the scene, moving into position. It's a display of huge firepower. The police were responding to a terror alert. According to the state interior minister, the police received an emergency call from someone who told them a masked and armed man had stormed into this cinema complex. The caller said 4 shots had been heard. With fears that there may be hostages, and with children apparently among them, a massive police operation was soon underway. The special police commandos gather near the entrance. There's a mood of urgency. The exits are quickly secured. Then, after cautiously approaching the front entrance, they storm inside. A police spokeswoman explains what happened next.
More and more police forces were called, and they moved into the building step by step. First, the threat was unclear. Then it turned into a hostage situation. We found the suspect and his hostages. The situation was threatening. So my colleague shot and fatally wounded him.
As the police operation was unfolding, cinema goers were seen fleeing in terror. Details are still unclear about the identity of the dead suspect and his motive. A cinema employee described the gunman as being aged between 18 and 25 and told workers to get inside an office before he went into one of the cinema's theaters. Some reports say he was armed with a rifle or a shotgun, and local officials said he appeared to be disturbed. Initial speculation suggested that there may have been mass casualties, but it's just the gunman who is dead. There are no reported other injuries. Yet the initial hysteria surrounding this incident and the scale of the police response has again underlined just how jittery the German authorities are following the recent mass casualty terror attacks in neighbouring France and Belgium.
Inigo Gilmore reporting there. Now, plans for a new £18 billion nuclear reactor at Hinkley Point in Somerset could be about to suffer another serious setback. Channel 4 News has learned that the quality of steel in the reactor vessel at Hinkley's sister plant in France is far worse than safety inspectors first feared. The discovery was made following tests on steel components destined for the Hinkley reactor in Somerset. Well, our science editor Tom Clark is here with the latest. Tom, tell us what is going on here.
Well, the plans for a new reactor at Hinkley in Somerset were strange enough as it is, largely due to the dire financial situation of the French energy giant EDF. But they took a turn for the worse last year when it emerged that there could be problems with the steel component at the heart of their flagship reactor at Flamanville in France. Now, this is the reactor pressure vessel in question on its way to be installed at Flamanville back in 2014. Now, this is an incredible engineering project with the precision steel component being built right into the heart of that plant. Now, the reactor pressure vessel is the most safety-critical part of a nuclear reactor because it contains the fuel rods themselves, the nuclear fuel itself, and pressurised water. And it was only once it was in that inspections found the steel contained too much carbon, which could, in certain conditions, make it more brittle.
So, safety regulators in France ordered tests to check if it was safe, right?
That's right, and that's where it gets interesting for us here in the UK, because when Areva, the company in France, engineering firm that makes these components, looked around for a spare part to do tests on, the only one they had lying around, one of the ones they had lying around, was the lid for the Hinkley Point reactor in Somerset. Now, what we understand is those tests have found that this carbon problem isn't just contained to the surface, it extends right into the depth of the steel itself. And it's possible that under certain conditions, that could make the reactor prone to cracking. And that's something you just can't have in a reactor.
Well, so what are the implications then for Hinkley Point?
Well, it's quite interesting. Because of delays to the Hinkley project itself, by the time this all came to light, EDF were able to source a new supplier for these components. That's going to be a forge in Japan. However, could have big ramifications for EDF itself, because if the French regulator aren't satisfied about the quality of the steel in the flagship plant in Flamanville, they might prevent it from operating until it can be fixed. And as you saw, that component goes right into the heart of the plant. It's concreted in. The costs and delays to EDF could be huge. And people who observe the industry are saying that could potentially undermine the financial case for Hinkley here in Somerset. Now, EDF told me today they reject any suggestion problems here could have a knock-on effect to Hinkley. However, and they went on to say they're happy that they will be able to satisfy the French regulator that the quality of the steel and the safety of this steel will allow them to start this reactor as planned in the end of 2018.
Many more twists and turns to go. Tom,
Yeah.
thanks very much. John.
Now, there are just under 3 hours left to vote in the referendum on Britain's membership of the EU as the long battle for votes comes to a close. A record 46.5 million people are eligible to cast their vote in this, the third national referendum in the country's history, as Fatima Manji now reports.
It was more than 4 decades ago that voters last had their say on Britain's future in the European community, in the 1975 referendum. Some who went to the polling station today remember voting then.
I mean, people years ago gave up their lives especially for women, to have their vote, and I think it's very important, yes.
For others, it was a whole new experience. This 18-year-old was voting for the very first time.
Does it feel like a historic day for you?
Absolutely. I think, this will be remembered for generations to come.
Have you just been to vote?
Yeah.
Do you think it's important?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's the future of the next generation. And I'm 21 now. I've got a long way to go still. So it's my future and then my nephew and my kids' future. So I've got to think of them and what they want.
The Prime Minister
In 1975, there was a parade of politicians, all smiles for the cameras on their way in to vote. Some things, it seems, never change. The Prime Minister and his wife were out early, as too was leader of the opposition Jeremy Corbyn. And by lunchtime, many of the key campaigners had marked their cross on the ballot paper. In some parts of London and the southeast, flash floods caused at least 2 polling stations to be moved, while the rest of the country has been basking in sunshine.
Unlike a general election, the votes in this referendum will be counted in local authorities rather than in constituencies. And that's made it a little bit more difficult to predict the result.
Although in Northern Ireland they're still counting by constituency. We can expect the first results at midnight from Gibraltar and the Scilly Isles. Bigger counts at Sunderland and Newcastle and the City of London should declare at about midnight. The overall picture is expected to become clear at around 3:30, when we'll have 200 results in. And we should expect a declaration sometime after 7 a.m. There are record numbers of people registered to vote, 46.5 million people. In some areas, turnout is expected to be high, with just under 3 hours left to decide Britain's future.
Well, the pound hit its highest level against other currencies this year as financial markets awaited the outcome of today's referendum. Share prices also shot up in the early morning. Well, our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is here. So, Helia, fill us in with what's been happening.
Well, another really significant day of gains across the markets. You saw the FTSE climb again, meaning that across the week, £105 billion has been added to the value of stocks and shares. And if we take a look at sterling, you can see that it almost hit $1.50 today. That's a really significant benchmark and the highest it's been this year. It had a bit of a wobble as people started to book some of those profits, but it regained some momentum. And across the week, sterling, remember, has been up almost 4%.
Well, give us some of the technicalities of what's going on here in the markets.
Well, one of the big issues is that a lot of the broker-dealers, banks like Goldman Sachs, have either suspended or have stopped taking orders in sterling-related trades. That means we're going in for a bit of a bumpy night because volumes will be down, liquidity will be down, meaning price movements will be more exaggerated. But while volumes won't be there, the people will be, because traders I spoke to said that they were all taking afternoon naps today because they have to return to their desks to trade all the way through the evening. In fact, Barclays told some of their traders to forego the naps altogether and bringing their sleeping bags to work. So quite a busy night for the city.
Indeed, sounds like fun. Helia, thanks very much. Well, today's voting was affected by the weather. Overnight thunderstorms and flash floods caused travel disruption in London, Essex and the southeast. And there's more rain on the way. Thunder and lightning heralded the start of the downpours, which led the Environment Agency to issue 7 flood warnings. In Kingston, 2 polling stations were among a number that were relocated after they flooded. In Essex, the River Rom burst its banks and fire brigades had to help people move to safety. In some parts of South London, nearly a month's rainfall came down in just a few hours. Roads that couldn't cope with the deluge were left swamped. Homes and businesses were also badly affected. And there was disruption on the rail networks because of localised flooding. A number of rivers in the region have now hit their highest level on record over the past 24 hours. Liam Dutton will, of course, have more on the weather outlook at the end of tonight's programme. John.
Now, back to our main report tonight. The protests by Democrats in the US Congress. They've just ended a 25-hour sit-in demanding tougher gun controls. Joining us now from Washington, the Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson. He's part of the protest. He's just come off the floor of the Congress. He also represents the city of Orlando, which, of course, has suffered the worst gun massacre in recent times. Also in Washington is Neil McCabe from Armed American Radio. Congressman Grayson, obviously, for every reason, you're demanding tighter gun control. But why does it take a dispute like this on the floor of the House to get anything done?
It's a failure of democracy. It's that simple. We're not any longer seeing government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The NRA has an iron grip over one of the 2 parties in America, the Republican Party. They determine the outcome of their primary process time after time, and they're insisting against common sense that we sustain the ability of virtually anyone to kill large numbers of people in a very short period of time.
Neil McCabe, I mean, you're a great defender of the gun in America and people's right to carry them, but even you must be absolutely shattered by what happened in Orlando and must indeed want people who have doubtful sanity, people with terrorist instincts, you need to be able to stop them buying guns.
Well, certainly we all mourn for the victims by this terrorist and also by the police who raided the club and ended the crisis. It's terrible, and let's not forget there are some people still in the hospital who are recovering, so there's an additional 50 survivors who are in hospital, and we think about them also. But that doesn't mean that we rewrite our Constitution on the fly for what did you say, John? Terrorist instincts. Who determines that, sir? A judge?
Well, that's exactly the question, isn't it? Congressman, what exactly would these laws do that you want to bring in?
Well, I've introduced a 1-cent bill to reinstate a law that was in effect for 10 years until it expired, an assault weapons ban. A ban on the kind of military weapons that are now available to people in the United States and have only one purpose, which is to kill large numbers of other people very quickly. The courts have already decided that the assault weapons ban is constitutional, and frankly, I think that that argument was always overstated. For 200 years in this country, the court said that there was no personal right to a weapon. In the Heller case recently, the court said that some people have the right to a handgun in their own homes. That's a far cry from military-style assault weapons that are essentially weapons of mass destruction that until a few months ago anybody could buy by walking into a Walmart. It's far too easy to kill too many people too quickly in America today. That has to change.
Well, I guess, Neil McCabe, you'd agree with most of that.
Not much of it, John.
What about automatic weapons?
I don't really know where to start.
Well,
I mean,
what about automatic weapons? Start there.
Are we talking about semi-automatic weapons or an actual weapon of war?
Well,
I don't see what the problem is, John. What is the problem with having a gun, John? Seriously, what is your problem with having a gun? Who are these people that you don't trust?
Congressman, could you answer him?
Yes, you can never know what is in people's heads. You can never know what is in people's hearts. But for sure you can know what is in their hands. And we have to make sure that what is in their hands is not a weapon that will allow them to kill one person, kill
Congressman,
with one weapon almost 50, don't interrupt me, almost 50 people in a matter of a few minutes. There is a video of the incident itself that's on the internet that was posted by one of the victims. There were 17 gunshots in 5 seconds, and the shooter actually broke in the middle.
Congressman, who are these terrorists? Who are these terrorists who are going to fill out background check forms, and if they're denied, just stop? If someone is a real terrorist, don't you think they're going to keep going?
Mr. McCabe,
and you
Mr.
know
McCabe,
yourself, sir. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. McCabe, could you just address the specific question that was being made by the congressman there, which is this issue of semi-automatic rifles, 17 shots in 5 seconds?
Well, I don't see what the problem is with that in and of itself. And certainly the congressman understands that in neighborhoods abandoned by the police or in rural areas where there's wild animals, and there are certainly cases where the congressman would want an American citizen to be armed if him and his family were in danger.
Congressman?
Right, Congressman?
Listen, I don't believe that the right to bear arms is absolute. I don't believe that the right to arm bears is absolute either. In either event, you're talking about wise laws that are necessary to save the lives of ordinary people, like the 49 people who were killed tragically in my district by someone who was able to walk into a gun store and buy a weapon that could kill that many people in a matter of a few minutes. I have to think that that's more of a concern to people in my district right now than some hypothetical that you're describing about bears.
Well, so this killer was interviewed at least twice by the FBI. His friends were calling the police. The gun store called the police. I mean, certainly, if I think the breakdown was not the fact that he had a gun. The breakdown was that law enforcement didn't pursue its leads. Correct?
That's ridiculous. No, the breakdown was that he was able to legally buy a weapon that could kill huge numbers of people very quickly. They interviewed him 3 times. They put him.
Yeah, Mr. McCabe, let the congressman speak.
Nobody should have the so-called right to kill huge numbers of their fellow human beings with impunity in a short period of time. I thank God that the man at least was not able to escape. If he had been, he would have been shooting all over town all night long. Is that the kind of country that you want to live in?
I want to live in a country, sir, where I can defend myself, I can defend my family. So you're saying I'm a victim? So when the killer comes into my house, I just do what? Nothing. I throw books at him, sir.
Mr. McCabe,
I have no right to defend myself in your world.
Could I just offer something else? I don't know if you know what this looks like from outside America looking in, but your country possesses more guns per person than there are people. I mean, there are more guns in America than there are people to wield them. This, to people outside, looks completely mad. You have more deaths by gun than any other developed country on earth. That surely has to be tackled. Do you accept that?
Well, I accept your statistics, but I don't think that that's a reason why people aren't coming to America. I mean, what's the point?
Congressman,
this country is a great country.
If guns could make people safe, America would already be the safest nation on the planet. We're not. We have among the industrial countries by far the highest death rate. Only places like Colombia and Syria and Venezuela even come close to the United States, places where there's literally open warfare between armed groups. Guns do not make us safe.
I just think that's
Guns
ridiculous.
kill us.
That's ridiculous, sir. That's ridiculous, sir. The idea that you could disarm a law-abiding citizen and tell him that he's now safer. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Congressman, could I ask you a final question? And that is there the remotest chance that your one-line measure will pass come July?
Yes, there is more than a remote chance. 7 states have adopted assault weapons bans. We have 43 to go. Sometimes you have to do it state by state. Sometimes the federal government can do it all at once, like we did in 1994 when we had fewer of these tragedies and people were less attuned to the fact that they personally were at risk every single day simply by going to the supermarket or going to school or going to a nightclub.
Congressman
Yes,
Grayson
we can
and Neil
succeed.
Congressman Grayson and Neil McCabe, thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Later, a surprising report on air pollution. Researchers have found that you could be breathing in more of it on a bus than standing by a busy street. And we meet the Paralympics track and field stars off to Rio as part of Team GB.
I'm really, really looking forward to Rio for the warm weather and the food, and of course, the running.
First, a problem with British Airways computers crashed in a UK system for stopping terrorists and criminals from flying. Now, a month after we reported that glitch, another problem with BA's IT systems has been uncovered. Almost 400 aircraft safety reports went missing for 3 months, meaning they could not be used to help maintain safety standards. Our technology reporter Jeff White has this exclusive report.
British Airways IT staff hitting the tarmac outside the Home Office last week.
Support our protest against British Airways outsourcing.
The UK's biggest airline has outsourced much of its IT work.
No way. Theresa May, no way.
And there's growing evidence that's caused serious safety and security issues. Earlier this month, we reported a computer glitch within BA that crashed Britain's no-fly list system. And now, a new problem. This time to do with planes, not passengers. BA's aircraft are closely inspected. Any problems are reported to a central system. But leaked documents show almost 400 of those safety reports were lost for around 3 months, thanks to a computer error by a BA contractor. A member of staff, who didn't want to be identified, told me why keeping those reports is vital.
If it wasn't picked up elsewhere, the Civil Aviation Authority would be able to collate the information and say, well, that's the 3rd time in 2 months that we've had a problem with that particular plane. Perhaps we need to tell the relevant airline, you need to look at this plane urgently because it seems to be a repetitive fault. It's a fail-safe system, if you like.
In documents we've seen, a senior BA manager described the lost reports as a serious failure.
Staff are extremely worried about this. They are mandatory requirements for a good reason.
It's not the first sign of trouble at the UK's biggest airline. Just weeks ago, we discovered that last year, a computer glitch crashed Britain's entire watchlist system for 3 days. So a key tool for preventing terrorists and criminals from flying was out of action for every airline. That too was down to a mistake by BA's contractors, say insiders.
So much goes wrong now, and so much of it doesn't get reported to the higher levels. So much of it gets excused as teething troubles. But if you ask the majority of staff, they'd all say the standards are going down, and quickly.
The Home Office, which oversees the no-fly list, told us security checks were maintained using another system. BA said,
"We select our third-party suppliers very carefully and would never compromise the safety and security of our IT systems. The issue with safety reports did not affect the safety of our aircraft or our ability to investigate aircraft incidents, and all notifiable incidents were reported to the CAA."
In an industry obsessed with safety and security, computer systems are a vital component. And with millions of us boarding planes every week, it's the last place you want an IT problem.
Jeff White reporting there. Now, Litchfield Penitentiary, the jail at the centre of the hit Netflix series Orange is the New Black, is seen by some as a microcosm of modern America's troubles. a gritty and dangerous place where the powerful and the powerless struggle to coexist. Matt Fry sat down with two of the show's biggest stars, Selenis Laver and Kate Mulgrew.
Bottom left, top right.
Remember, upper hand, right away.
Establish dominance. Got it.
Habakkuk, Dwight. You're in here. Bottom right, top left.
I think what's captivated everybody is the very fact that they are sort of opening a door. It's the rabbit hole, isn't it?
That's right, that's right.
Opening the door and peering down and going with us.
And yet within that, having opened the door, looking into the abyss of prison life, it's actually quite normal. I mean, it's political, it's social, it's sexual, it has all the stuff that goes on.
Well, it's human.
Outside
human,
a prison.
yes.
It's human, exactly.
I think that's the success of the show, that it is human. These stories, it takes place in a prison, but the stories are human stories. They're not prison stories. They're human stories.
But also it introduces characters to the audience that aren't normally seen on American television. Like, for instance, the trans character, Sophia.
Yes.
You yourself have a trans sister.
For me, as a supporter of the LGBT community, having a trans sister and having her be somehow represented, I think is absolutely wonderful.
Oh shit, that's Betty Crocker herself. I was in that grass this morning, that exact grass. Damn, we could have been in this pic, been all prison famous. You know what's better than being famous?
Pizza, daisies, smelly markers, any animal, a really good dream, a warm bath, picking a booger, a dry one, pizza, graham crackers and icing sandwiches, the feeling you get when you make a really good joke and someone laughs in a nice way, not a mean way. And
So you've got this gritty show, and it's about, you know, Latino power, and it's about immigrants, and yet you have an election campaign in America that seems to be taking part in a different galaxy almost.
I'm personally mortified, and I will say that to you. I'm
We
sure
are
you-
all mortified.
Absolutely astounded that it's come to this. But of course, she's clinched the nomination, Mrs. Clinton. She will be our next
You're happy
president.
about that?
I couldn't be happier.
So
I
why
want
is
to
it-
see her go
So,
mano
okay,
a mano.
so you like Hillary Clinton?
Yes.
Why do some women, and there are quite a lot of women, not like Hillary Clinton and even contemplate voting for Donald Trump? Explain that to me.
Do you know which faction of American women dislike her the most? The Southern women. I was reading all about it. And do you know why? Well, she's giving us all a bad name. What's going to happen to the way we run our lives and our homes and our jewelry and our husbands and our lovers and our... Because she's going to now do what a man does. It's a redefinition of everything we know.
They feel threatened by her.
I am delighted by her.
I
And I've
am
met the
too.
woman, and she's a charming woman. She's the real deal. This is going to be it. What a life we've had, you and
Yes.
I. We've had an African-American president. Now we're going to have a woman. It's absolutely brilliant. I feel so lucky.
And the joke on Twitter is that the transition from Barack Obama to Donald Trump, if he were to become the president, is orange is the new black.
You see? I'm just laughing.
You've heard that joke, right?
I have. I've seen the picture of his orange face with that. Yes.
I will leave the country.
We've never had an election with two such unpopular candidates. So it's not over yet.
But you know, this lack of popularity thing they ascribe to her is baloney. It's not that she's unpopular. It's that women are afraid of what this is going to mean. Women have to redefine themselves and change the conversation. Now we finally have somebody who's going to be in the vanguard. She's going to take the executive seat. It's a great, great day. And I think that we have to, change the way we're talking about this. She's not unpopular. She's great. There's a difference.
So as a Latina woman, are you confident that enough Latinas have been sufficiently frightened by the prospect of mass deportation and wars and all the rest of it that Donald Trump has suggested, that they're actually going out to register to vote? Because that's what it comes down to.
I think people are going to come out and vote. I know they are. I know.
Are your friends
specifically-
registering? Are they getting
yes,
engaged?
I have been part of, the Rock the Vote movement and specifically targeting the Latino community. And I know we're going to turn up. We have to.
And if he decided to soften his line on attitudes to Mexico and Latinas, is there anything you could say that would convince you that he's
already
not going
said
to try
it
and do
all.
these things?
He's already said I know who he is. I appreciate that he spoke so
More
harshly.
to the point, you know who he isn't. And he is not
and
a
he is
human
not.
being.
But there's a reason why he's done so well. There's a reason why anger converts into politics in America at the
Well, he's
moment.
appealing to the white male working class who aspire to be like him, but they have not studied him. And they have not examined this thing thoroughly. They haven't. It's an easy thing to have a beer and say, yeah, I be like, no more baloney, no more.
Let's get our
They
culture
have
back.
not been discerning in their judgment of this. They need to be. Young men, get it together.
Yes.
Kate Mulgrew and Salinas Levia from Orange is the New Black, speaking there with Matt Fry. And the US Supreme Court is split over Barack Obama's plan to give millions of undocumented immigrants the right to work. The president issued an executive order in 2014 which was aimed to offer as many as 5 million undocumented people the right to work legally in the United States, as well as sparing them from deportation. But the plan was challenged by the coalition of 26 states led by Texas. The population of the United Kingdom has risen above 65 million for the first time ever. It's increased by more than 500,000 over the last year. About one-third of that is due to natural growth, with births exceeding deaths. The number of people aged over 65 has continued to grow more strongly than the overall population. The Iraqi army is claiming that 90% of Fallujah has been cleared of so-called Islamic State militants. A month since their offensive began, Iraqi forces say there are only a few pockets in the north of the city which are still to be liberated. There are local reports of fires and looting in the south. Tens of thousands of refugees have fled on foot to already overcrowded camps. Now, the commander of Colombia's biggest rebel group has called it the last day of war, as a ceasefire was agreed to end Latin America's longest-running civil conflict. The historic deal between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas has just been signed at a sumptuous ceremony in the Cuban capital of Havana. Almost 250,000 people have lost their lives since the conflict began, more than half a century ago.
Now, how should society respond to the rise of the sex trade? It's become so pervasive, it sometimes feels as if it's part of the mainstream culture. A new book by the feminist author Kat Banyard, Pimp State, raises some key questions, from whether it should be legal to pay for sex to whether porn is warping the attitudes of a generation of boys. So she joins me now, along with Nikki Adams from the English Collective of Prostitutes. Kat, you argue that there's been a big increase in the number of men paying for sex. Why do you think that is?
Well, during the 1990s, the number of men doubled to nearly 1 in 10 men who pay for sex.
In the UK?
That's right. I mean, this was at the same time that we saw a general mainstreaming and expansion of the global sex trade. But crucially, because we can see that demand can grow, it can also shrink. So putting the lie to old adages like it's the oldest profession, demand for the sex trade is not inevitable, but it requires us to tackle the sexist attitudes that underpin it.
I'll come on to that, but why is it increasing?
Well, there is increased, the attitudes which fuel it are being reinforced, and that the sex trade pumps out many myths to fuel that demand, such as prostitution is inevitable, that it's just ordinary work, and that by making it legal, brothels legal and pimping legal, you somehow make it safe. So all in all, we've seen this surge, and it's crucial that now as a society we tackle it.
Nikki, but prostitution, sex work, call it what you will, needs to be tackled. Do you have any sympathy with that view, or is it boom time for you and your colleagues?
Well, I wouldn't call it boom time, but I think there has probably been an increase in prostitution, but there's also been an increase in women's poverty. Austerity has particularly, 70 to 80% of the austerity cuts have targeted women. We have women in our group who actually managed to get out of prostitution and have gone back into prostitution. We also have a lot of women who started but have been trapped in prostitution because of a criminal record.
So you use those words, trapped and forced into prostitution, so you accept that sex work is not something that women want to be doing?
In the same way as a lot of people don't like their, I think 60% of the UK working population don't like their job. They find their job exploitative, too lowly paid. 0-hour contracts have kind of come across the board. So only in that extent, when I say trapped, I mean that where women want to leave or not want to go into prostitution in the first place, you always look at the choices that are available. And in most cases, that's other low wage and exploitative work. And
let me just pick up on that point.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. But
no.
Low paid work, is, grind, is prostitution, is sex work any worse?
Sexual exploitation is not a solution to poverty, and sex buyers are not just ordinary consumers, they're exploiters. When a man pays a woman to perform sex acts on him, that money is not sort of coincidence, it's coercion. And a trade in which men pay to sexually access women's bodies is fundamentally incompatible with equality between women and men.
But what if sex workers don't feel like that? I mean, sex workers don't see prostitution as any more exploitative than other jobs. And in some cases, we actually go into sex work to escape from the exploitation of other low-wage jobs. And I think it's difficult for people outside to look in and say, well, we judge you according to these standards without looking at the other choices that we're having to make. I don't know why prostitution is seen as more exploitative than, you know, begging or having to watch our children go without food. And that's the reality of many women in this society. We don't think it's a great job, but it's often the better choice out of a set of very bad choices. Criminalisation doesn't help it.
Nikki and her colleagues don't feel exploited.
Well, there are many women who speak out about their experiences of abuse within the sex trade. And international research that's been done shows that 9 out of 10 women in prostitution say they would like to get out but feel unable to do so, which is why the End Demand campaign, which is an alliance of organisations including Women's Aid and the End Violence Against Women Coalition, are calling on the Home Affairs Select Committee, led by Keith Vaz, to recommend that the government adopts a sex bylaw and finally starts to tackle the demand that drives prostitution.
I'll come back to the legalisation, decriminalisation, all of that. But I mean, in Kat's book, she talks about Eastern Europeans working 16 hours a day, having to have sex with 4 men a night just to break even and pay their rent. That's exploitation.
That is a very horrible situation. But what is going to improve the situation for those women? It's not going to be criminalising clients, which force us into isolated areas and prevent us working together for safety. I mean, that has to be the crucial thing. I mean, no matter how you feel about prostitution, the question is what's actually going to help women in prostitution to improve their working conditions and get out? And it has been shown that decriminalisation does that. It's been tried in New Zealand, and it really should be implemented here.
The women that you just mentioned were women in a legal brothel in Germany that I visited, and I went door to door in this multi-storey brothel.
It is. It's very different from decriminalisation, because that
New Zealand doesn't actually have a so-called decriminalised regime because local authorities can put restrictions on where brothels operate. So this distinction, which is often made between New Zealand and Germany, is false.
That sex workers can actually work together.
They can in Germany,
they can set up their own premises, but they're registered in Germany.
Going room to room in a brothel was all women none of whom spoke German as a first language, and all of whom were very, very young.
What about the German super brothels?
The legalised system is a very problematic system. In Germany, it sets up a two-tier system where you can't work outside of those legalised areas. So it gives the bosses and the government enormous powers. In New Zealand, they did do something different. They decriminalised, they removed prostitution from the criminal law. They made a distinction between prostitution and violence. Violence remained criminalised. And it gave the workers power.
We're nearly out of time. Very briefly, are you just moralising? Are you a modern-day Mary Whitehouse?
Look, opposing the sex trade is about opposing sexism, not sex.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Nikki Adams, Kat Banyard, thank you very much for joining me. John.
Stand next to a busy main road and you can almost see the haze of traffic fumes in the air, but we've discovered you could be exposed to more pollution if you're actually sitting on a bus. Research by this programme found that pollution levels inside our buses are worse than those if you stand outside on the pavement. Our science editor has this.
You can trust a bus. They cut congestion on the daily commute and are cheap and accessible enough for those who can't or can't afford to drive. But can we trust them when it comes to the air we breathe?
Channel 4 News has been riding the buses wearing these portable air pollution monitors. And what we found is that on the majority of journeys, you're breathing in twice as much of the most harmful air pollution while sitting on the bus than you are standing on the pavement next to it.
It sounds counterintuitive, but our findings grew out of work by air quality researchers at King's College London.
This is the black carbon monitor.
As part of her PhD research, Diana Silva has been giving monitors to different groups of people, young, old, and those with chronic lung diseases, to understand their everyday exposure to air pollution.
This is the power button.
She discovered that one of her participants made a regular journey on this bus in South London. It had unusually high air pollution levels.
So we can see clearly the difference.
You must have, this is, 50 times higher?
It was exceptionally higher, yeah.
So how widespread a problem could bad bus air be? Channel 4 News borrowed some of the monitors to investigate.
These monitors measure the tiniest particles of black carbon, less than 2.5 microns across. It's essentially ultrafine soot, and it's the best indicator of toxic diesel pollution.
As I stand by the road waiting for the 214, I'm breathing around 3 micrograms of particles per cubic metre of air. When I get on the bus, it's a very different story. Inside, readings go up, averaging nearly 12 micrograms per cubic metre. At one point on my journey, it spikes at 25.6. That's 9 times worse than at the curbside. We repeated this experiment on a random selection of buses across London, taking journeys of 20 minutes or more. Of the 19 trips we made, 13 had air quality worse than pavement. To see if it wasn't just a London phenomenon, we took our monitors to the city of Leeds and found a similar picture there. In both cities, averaged across all journeys, air inside buses was twice as polluted as the air you'd breathe walking along the pavement.
Our analysis found air quality varied on different buses travelling the same routes, and it is only a snapshot of a number of journeys, but still it points to a problem of bad air on our buses.
They all show same sort of black carbon levels inside the bus. So that indicates that actually the air pollution that is inside the bus is coming from the surrounding vehicles and buses and is getting trapped in the bus because there is little or no air inside, so there is no dispersion.
So the research suggests the majority of buses have lower air quality because they operate in congested areas and that air is trapped inside. A similar problem is known to exist in private cars and taxis. But this doesn't explain far higher pollution readings found in the single-decker bus in Bromley.
We think probably that was a case of a leaking engine.
Right, so the exhaust from the bus is actually
Exactly.
inside the vehicle.
Yeah.
In a statement, Transport for London told us,
"We're committed to working with the Mayor to deliver new measures, including further greening of the capital's bus fleet. Buses are examined regularly and checked specifically for exhaust leakage in the interior of the bus."
West Yorkshire Combined Authority told us it was working closely with Leeds City Council to ensure compliance with EU air quality standards by 2020. The pollution levels we found were within accepted health limits, but pressure is mounting on the government over air quality.
There's a growing body of evidence around the health impacts from diesel pollution. There's evidence that it's a carcinogen. It's been linked with a range of fatal health effects, including heart attacks, strokes, asthma, even diabetes and mental illness. So it's really important that the government gets a grip on this.
As long as our cities are run on dirty diesel engines, air inside buses and out won't improve. Until it does, if you want the best air quality in town, you're better off walking or cycling than riding a bus.
Tom Clark reporting. Now, after the break, they're heading for Rio with dreams of gold. We meet the first track and field athletes named on Britain's Paralympic squad, from the teenager making her debut to one of the world's most decorated stars.
Welcome back. Now, the first 13 athletes who will be heading to the Rio Paralympics as part of Team GB's track and field squad have been named. And they range from a teenage sprinter making her debut to David Weir, one of the most decorated Paralympians in the world. Our sports reporter Jordan Jarrett-Bryan has been speaking to them about their hopes of success at this summer's Games.
I was only told yesterday and I was with my mum. I was like, Mum, I'm going to the Paralympics.
The excitement of being selected for her first Paralympic Games is uncontainable.
My name's Maria Lyle. I'm 16 years old and I've been selected to go to my first Paralympic Games.
New to the team, Lyle is still in awe of some of the more celebrated members, but appreciates the mix of youth and experience.
I'm really shy, so I always think they're a bit above me, so I don't.
You just speak to him?
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, they're there. I think they're really cool, and I think it'll be good having the experienced people there to help like new people like me.
The last phase of training is very intense. You feel like crying most of the day, but yeah, I'm feeling sick.
From one athlete at the start of their Paralympic journey to another approaching the finishing line.
Hi, I'm David Weir. This is my 5th Paralympics. I won 4 gold medals in London. See you in Rio.
David Weir is one of the most decorated Paralympians in history, but is undecided on whether there'll be a 6th. And will this be your final Paralympic Games?
Probably. It'll probably be my last track racing for Paralympics.
And Weir feels it's time to consider merging the Paralympic Games with the Olympics.
I think some events can be part of the Olympic programme. I still think we can still have a Paralympics, but I still think that the ones that have merged don't need to be in the Paralympics. But we could still go and race it. Might not be fair for some categories, but I think that some can be merged, yeah.
Rory McIlroy this week pulled out of the golf team selected to go to Rio due to fears over the Zika virus outbreak. But Weir doesn't share the same concerns.
I was at the beginning, but you know, I've listened to our medical staff. If they say we're in safe hands, then I'll listen to them.
Are your family coming to?
No, my family's not going. My missus is pregnant, so yeah, she won't be going. But yeah, they wouldn't have been going anyway. It's too far with you know, 2 kids.
Zika isn't the only issue marring the build-up. Security is also high up on the agenda. An Australian Paralympian was robbed at gunpoint this week, but runner Paul Blake is confident their safety will be prioritised.
I'm sure the Brazilian authorities and the security over there are doing all they can to make it secure enough for the athletes to thrive in the village and around the Olympic Park. I guess you've just got to be in the wrong place at the wrong time to get at gunpoint. So she was extremely unlucky.
But the main focus is winning, as the current team is ready and prepared to beat their record-breaking haul of medals from almost 4 years ago.
Jordan Jarrett Brown reporting. Tonight's main news: Democrats in the US Congress have ended a 25-hour sit-in to protest against the lack of action on gun controls in the wake of the Orlando massacre. One of the congressmen who was part of the protest told this programme they'd acted because of a failure of democracy. And in the last few moments, the US Senate has blocked a plan to stop gun sales to people on some terrorism watch lists.
And we'll be back tomorrow with a special lunchtime programme on the EU referendum results. That's at 10 to 12.
And at 7 tomorrow night, well, we'll have full analysis and reaction. But until then, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.